thousand suns were lit by just one yes. It paved the
Hello everybody, my name is Reenah and I'm calling from Australia. Today I'll be talking with Neelam, and for the first time actually we meet, and Neelam is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So hello Neelam.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
For sure, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad we are doing this.
Yeah. You know, lately in a circle of friends, we've been reflecting on awakening, and this question seems to arise quite a bit. Is the spiritual seeker becoming more empowered, or is the spiritual seeker becoming confused? We hear so many stories about awakening, and particularly awakening moments that we've had in our life, or the day we became awakened. And yet it appears that this awakening is a memory of something that happened, shall we say, in a past moment. And then how useful is it if each moment is a renewal, and this awakening story happens back there, do we somehow define ourselves with this story and block ourselves from something new coming in?
So, you know, this is a big subject, awakening. Yeah. It's not, it's not very small, and I'm going to try to answer it in a shorter way, so we don't have to spend all our time talking about it. I would say that there is definitely a moment that I would call awakening. And I would say that there are experiences and events that lead to that moment. And that moment of awakening really happens in a moment. You know, it's not a process, even though there is a process that leads to that. But then, you know, we have this a lot of understanding and misunderstanding about awakening, and we think awakening means the end of all arising. And I would say that is not true. Right? However, there is that defining moment when we, you know, in the process that leads to awakening, there is moments of knowing our true nature, and then there's moments of going back into the contraction of our sense of identity, and then again we have moments of knowing our true nature, and then we again go back into that contraction of our, you know, believing ourselves to be something, right? And in this process, there is still a doubt, you know, there's times of knowing, and there's times of openness and times of expansion, but there's also doubt. There's also times of, oh, I don't know who I am, I don't know what it is, you know, and eventually, and that process goes on and on and on for however long. It's different for everybody, right? There's no prescribed, you know, time or situation, but eventually something happens And what happens is what I would call awakening, which is, the sense of identity moves from this body into presence. And in that moment, we recognize that who we are is beyond all this experience. And not only we recognize that, but that becomes the ground of our experience, right? So that how we used to identify ourselves as this body, and that used to be the reference point, And I'm not talking about mentally, but I'm talking really every time we looked, there was a point of reference. Now, once this awakening happens, when we look, there's no more point of reference. Does that mean this is the end of conditioning, or does that mean this is the end of arising, or does it mean nothing ever arises after that? No, for sure not, right? However, there's a defining moment that changes that, perspective, right?
So can we help other people to awaken? Like, so often people will come and see a teacher because they perceive that the teacher can perhaps guide them to an awakening.
Well, you see, the desire to know our true nature, that's a desire that arises within, right? And so to awaken means to know our true nature. And that very desire really is what brings us to a teacher, right? That's what really, it's like if awakening was to happen on its own, it would, right? And if it doesn't happen on its own, which, it happened for Ramana, it happened on its own, right? I'm sure there's many examples of where it happened on its own. But for many of us, it didn't. And so what happens then is that consciousness responds to that desire. And it wants to support it. And therefore, we find ourselves in the presence of a teacher. So a teacher's function is not so much, to awaken somebody, right? A teacher's function is just to keep reminding oneself, keep reminding that, present is our true nature and it's already here. Right? And that, again, some people come, like I used to sit with Papaji, and people would come and they would just recognize and they would sit, And some people will come and they will sit and it will take months or years or who knows how long, right? We don't know how long it takes, it doesn't matter. But then the teacher or the meeting with the teacher is really that reminder that says, well, who you are is already here. You don't have to look for it, right? You don't have to go somewhere and look for it. So can we help somebody? Presence does help, right? It helps itself to know its true nature.
So often we believe that our thoughts are our life. We have our thoughts about the situation.
Of course.
And then we believe that this is our life.
Sure.
And so what role do thoughts actually play? Do we actually create our life situation with our thoughts? Like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like they call it?
I wouldn't, yeah, or what's the other part, or?
Yeah, or are they just like solid situations that we find ourselves in? That.
I would say that thoughts really are an interpretation, right? They are really an overlay over what's actually happening in a moment. Because, if thoughts were creating what's happening in a moment, that would be pretty scary, I think, That would be pretty intense, right? So I would say events happen, events just arise, right? And now we can either know that this is just the way things are, right? Or we can interpret it in some way. And that's the mental, physical, emotional experience. It's an interpretation, right? There's a constant interpretation going on based on our past experiences, based on whatever else is happening, based on a lot of things. But it's not really creating reality, right? Reality is
creating our reality if we believe it. Like the interpretation, I guess you could say, is the meaning we place on the thought. It becomes the belief. And so if we are placing the meaning on the belief, is that not creating how we are experiencing this moment if we are putting the meaning on it?
It will create your inner experience. It's not going to change the reality of what's happening in a moment, you see. What's happening is, right, your inner, you can either be at rest with what is, to make it very simple, to simplify. You can either be resting with what is, or you can be suffering because of it, right? So the interpretation, the more you believe your thoughts, your stories, your ideas, the more you identify yourself as this person, as this body and mind, the more you're going to have, the more you're going to be suffering, right? The more in the circumstances you're going to have certain particular experiences, right? And the less you do that, the less you identify with it, the more you recognize that things just are, that your body and mind has responses to it, of course, but it doesn't have to really define your reality, right? It doesn't really have to create your reality. Yes, it does react. There is feelings, sensations, emotions, thoughts, for sure. But it doesn't have to really define the moment, right?
So some people have say they're having a unfriendly thought, shall we say, that they are running with, and some of us may point to that as suffering, okay? And even though this suffering is not true, somehow we still keep running with it because the thought is the story that we're believing in that moment.
But the moment you believe anything other than who you really are, you're going to be suffering, for sure.
Yeah.
If there is any...
So how? Sorry.
That's okay. That's good. So how what?
So okay. So it comes up then, okay, and then we're believing this story at the moment, okay, this thought that's not true, but somehow our attention is just so narrowed and running with it. So then how do we really, shall we say, see what really is here now? Like obviously if we're running with the story's not really here, is it?
So that's why when I teach this process of self-inquiry, right? And what it means is that at first, what I really teach is the direct experience of presence, so that everybody knows the difference. Because first we need to know, you see, we first need to know the difference between this is thinking and feeling and sensing and emoting, and this is who we really are, right? And slowly, of course, nothing goes linear, so it's not like we can just get this done and then move on, but because it's a process, the deeper we go, the more we see, oh, there's still other layers of believing, thinking and feeling and sensing, right? But first we need to know the difference, you see. We need to know, right? Because otherwise, if you don't know, you're always going to be following it, right? So we start with the direct experience of presence. And once you know that, now we can say everything else is what potentially has the potential to cause suffering. Right? Your involvement with everything else has the potential to cause suffering. So once we know the difference, now we can discriminate within, and we can very simply recognize, am I at rest right now? Am I really knowing my true nature? Right? Or am I suffering? And you know, I call suffering a lot of things, because I like to simplify things, you know, so I say everything other than resting in our true nature is suffering, right? So once we know the difference, once you begin to recognize in your own process, what is the difference between really being at rest in your true nature, and what is the difference between that and suffering? Now you can apply this process that I call, that is called inquiry or self-inquiry process, where you can address what arises, where you can meet it and you can let it come back to rest in your true nature. Right? Because ultimately everything just wants to be here, you see? Everything just wants to be here. That's why things are arising. Right?
So I guess we could make the distinction that when we feel a contraction being, say, the negative story or the suffering, that we can know that this is not true. Is that right? We can recognize that this is a story or something, or a thought that I'm believing that's not true. That would be our signpost.
Beautiful. And it will be slowly we can name it, we can recognize it for what it really is, which is, that's suffering, that's not true, that's not who we are, that's a story. And the more we can recognize it for what it is, the sooner we can come back to rest in our true nature.
How can we name it in a way that we don't sort of deflect what is arising, yet do what you call a true inquiry? Like, because the tendency would be often we have a temptation to want to stop feeling it because we're afraid or uncomfortable with the intensity of the sensation that arises in the body.
Sure, and that's why, you know, the inquiry process that I teach is based on sensation, right? So we use the mind only to direct our attention, but the process of inquiry is sensation based, so we actually spend time noticing the sensations in the body. And so that's how we learn to really be present to it rather than avoid it in some way, right? There is no, you know, in my world, there's no spiritual bypass, right? We really need to meet it and see what it really is, right?
So in a sense, wherever we place our attention is what we are experiencing in this moment, right? For example, if I'm placing my attention on this thought and putting meaning on it, like it actually is valid, then that's my experience. But by placing, yeah.
If you just keep thinking, then of course you're not going to, once we are involved in thinking, we can't really come back to rest, right? We need to give it up. We need to really simply be willing to come back and meet what is present in a moment and face it as a sensation in your body. Because once you notice it as a sensation, then this is a gateway to presence, right? Now you are really close to what actually is, not what you're thinking, not what you're believing, not what you interpreting to be here, right? But it's very practical. Sensation is very practical, It's either light or it's dark, or it's heavy or it's open, or it's, or it's pleasant or it's difficult, It's very, very simple.
And so can we be open with these sensations, these intense sensations that want to come through? Like you say, you bring the attention to the sensation and come to rest. Okay, so coming to rest means that somehow I'm not believing that thought anymore. And coming to rest means I'm not believing that thought. And in that moment where I'm not believing a thought, there can be like, shall we say, like an energetic, and our attention frees up, right?
Yeah, and also we pay attention to the body because the body takes its time to unwind. You see, once we have believed the thought, now we have the brain and the nervous system and the hormones and everything involved in the body in believing of that story, right? So even though you may see in a moment that the thought is not true, that it may still take some time in your body and mind for it to really move through that, aggravation or that, whatever is going on, until you really come back to rest, right? Until you really knowing, again, back to knowing completely.
And yet that openness is there, even with the uncomfortable sensation, that openness is there because somehow I've unstuck myself from that thought. But like you say, it takes some time for the sensation. Can we in that moment actually make a new thought about the situation that's actually more empowering? Like I'm believing, oh no, I can't do this because I'm just not sort of capable of doing it, or those people are talking about me. Can I then in that moment say, actually I can, and change the self-talk?
Well, the moment you really address in your true nature, then all of that, of course, falls away, the past falls away. And that opens you up to seeing things in a different way, right? That's a natural process. Once you're not caught in it anymore and you really, really addressed, right? Then naturally, first of all, that everything is okay the way it is, right? You know that nothing has to be different, that you don't have to change, that the circumstances don't have to change, that whatever is arising within doesn't have to change. And when you know that, suddenly that openness, that opens the whole possibility, right? Now everything is possible. Whatever we have been thinking, that's just the past, right? Now there's a lot more possibility, right, in a moment.
And possibility is a possibility of choices, right? That all of a sudden we see our choice.
When you say choice, what do you mean by that?
Like often when I'm running with the thought, I'm running with it because I think I have no other choice but to run with it, because I believe that's what I am. I believe that is who I am. And then somehow in the resting into openness, there's, I see choices, options available to create, shall we say, and to move from this place of openness rather from this place of limited belief.
Yeah, and so in the moment when you're running with the story and you finally realize that that's what's happening, then you're making a choice for being present, right? Once that happens, now everything is possible, right?
Because
Everything.
so much, I've said this before, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners here have heard me say this before, but so much we have been told in some spiritual teachings that really about the choiceless choice, and really we don't have a choice, and that to somehow, you know, that just grace comes through, right? And you know, like I don't know, I'm discovering I do have choice.
Yeah, you do have a choice, and that choice is to be here, right?
Yeah.
That is the choice, because the moment you make that choice, then everything else is available, right? That's the choice, because sometimes we think we can mentally choose something different, you see? And that kind of choice is not really true, because it's just short-lived. Because a moment later, the past is going to come back, right? So the choice we really have is to be present, you see? That's the choice we have. And once we do that, now everything is available, right? Now all the choices are possible, right? Once we do that.
Yeah. So when you talk about that mental choice and it doesn't change anything, you know, I think I hear you, because so often we can use this mental choice as an overlay or change one belief for another belief, but that's not what real change is, shall we say, because it's just like a band-aid stuck on top of another sort of band-aid. So really it's in that openness, what you call the resting, where there is openness and unlimited possibilities, shall we say, of being and creativity, that it's from this place that we can make, shall we say, a true choice.
Yeah, and then, you know, inspiration comes from that, and the real movement comes from that, and, you know, and presence moves from there, you know. So of course, you know, it's then all these different choices become available, right? Of course, of course.
Yeah. So I'm just going to change pace now and ask another question. There's, you know, sort of a few questions here from a few different people, and I thought maybe we could sort of play with them.
Okay.
One of them is about money, of course. You know, I think there would be just a very, very limited amount of people on this planet who don't somehow rely on the financial institution or system, shall we say, to support themselves and their families. And there can often be a really big victimhood around this too, you know, and justification for why we can't be free even, you know, because, you know, and also then it's often what happens is people get very busy to sort of maintain their financial situation, and then begin to believe even in their busyness. And in their busyness, sometimes we really don't really receive another deeply. You know, we're all in a hurry. Hi, how are you? Good. Yeah, got to go. I'm busy. You know, it's like, so somehow, you know, some people sometimes miss the resting. And what, you know, about money, you know, how can we become free from our worry about money?
Well, money is again like a bigger topic, right? So let's try to let's try to talk a little bit about it. But you know, money. We will first need to understand what money is. because we have so much misunderstanding about it. And so money became a lot of things for us. And I would say money is just the means that we need to support ourselves in the world. And I would say originally money was really a means of exchange of energy, right? You know, before money, we would just share goods, right? You will do this and I will do that, and you will grow this and I will grow that, and we just exchange things. And this is just a means of really sharing, right? Means of sharing, means of exchange of energy, right? But by now, you know, money became something very different, right? First of all, money and survival, which is a very, very basic, deep conditioning in the human body. You know, those two things got coupled together, money and survival, right? And then also, you know, by now, money gained a lot of different meanings. And the meanings that it gained is power and success and meaning and fulfillment and, you know, and so on and on and on, right? Or you know, a sense of worth, right? A sense of self-worth. We measure oftentimes, we measure a sense of self-worth by money, right? How much money we have or don't have, right? So because there is a lot of conditioning around money, you know, and money doesn't mean anymore what it used to mean. So when you are sitting here right now, Reenah, when you are sitting here, and when you just look within yourself and you find that stillness of your true nature, then in this moment here, is anything needed for the survival of your body?
No, nothing's needed right now. No.
Beautiful, beautiful. Beautiful, and that's the truth, moment by moment by moment, right? So, you know, the worry of money, around money, is not really so much connected to money, even though that has its own, you know, worries, of course. But it's way more connected to the sense of survival in this body, right? Once those two get coupled together, then money becomes survival, right? And once money becomes survival, we cannot make choices that we need to make for money to be what it is, which is the means to support ourselves in the world, right? So if we can really work on separating or uncoupling survival and money, right? If we can really learn to recognize the anxiety that arises within around money or survival or not having or having, because having also causes anxiety, right? So if we can learn to recognize that, and if we can learn to not to act on that, if we can learn to recognize it for what it is and really sit with it and really be with it until we come back to rest, right? And this is where we want to pursue money from, okay? We don't want to pursue money from a sense of survival, right? And you know, and this is, I'm just very, very simplifying, because again, you know, we could talk for hours about it, but that also would be the same with, you know, if money means self-worth to somebody, then I would say that needs to be uncoupled too, right? Or if money means, you know, success, that's the measure of success, then I would say that needs to be uncoupled too, right? So that we can pursue money for what it really is, the means that it really is, right? Rather than pursuing it for all these different reasons, you know, that are really the reasons that are not reasons of money, right? there are other reasons.
That's a really great distinction, Neelam, that often we perceive our worry to be about something, in this case money, but often it's not what it appears, right? It's like it is simply worry itself. And once again, that's a thought. It's a thought about something that's not really true.
Yeah, it's a thought and it's a sensation, you know, and it's a
Yes, and the thought creates,
yeah, and it's a strong, you know, sense of, you know, adrenaline and tension and fear and whatever it comes with. And if we believe that, then we make our choices regarding money out of that. And that, of course, is what causes trouble, right?
Yes, so often many of us are really afraid of these really strong sensations, to really allow them to be there and to meet them in a sense, because it's in intensity. It's like often we will look to deflect this. So how is it that what would you say to someone who has these repetitive intense sensations arise in their body? What is the best way for them to meet this?
Well, first of all, we need to, you know, we need to be willing to put down the story, right? We need to be willing to disengage from what we believe is happening in a moment. And we need to have the willingness to actually experience it as it is, right? So that means, you know, the mind has its own, you know, ideas about it, and we can see that and we can look at it, but eventually it takes a really strong discipline at first, a discipline of really putting it aside, right? The willingness to put it aside and then to really be present to just what is. And you know, you can start right now. We can both start just by noticing, you know, noticing your feet on the ground, right? Or just noticing the weight of your body as you're sitting, right? Or just maybe noticing, maybe your back is leaning on the chair, you know, maybe noticing that, right? So this simple awareness of it is what we have to train ourselves in, right? Because when strong sensations arise, we automatically move into thinking, right? We automatically try to find a way out of it, and usually the way out is by thinking, right? So we have to have the discipline of recognizing that, and then really coming back to sense the body and to be present to it just on the level of sensation.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's just break that down a little bit. Firstly, I just wanted to point to the mind. So often, also in spirituality, we refer to the mind or to the ego as like it's almost an enemy or something, maybe, I don't know, or that it puts us into thinking, but it's not really. The mind or the thinking is not really the problem, is it? It's the meaning that we put onto it. Is that right? It's the meaning that we put onto these thoughts. Because thoughts are thoughts, right? Thoughts come and go, you know, collective, personal, whatever it is. None of the thoughts really, shall we say, belong to us. Most of our thoughts are adopted somehow. But really, there's nothing wrong with the thoughts, is there? Except that when we're believing them and putting a meaning on them, that somehow we define ourselves in that moment.
We can say always that thoughts arise in presence, right?
Yeah.
The ego or the mind or whatever we call it arises in presence, right? that's not really the cause of suffering, right?
No.
The cause of suffering is our believing of that sense of separation, right? That comes with ego, mind, or thoughts. That's the cause of suffering, right?
So but isn't it the meaning that we put on it? Because I have thoughts, and I mean, I feel completely at peace, and I feel completely open, and yet there's so many thoughts that are moving through at the same time, and sometimes some of these thoughts are not even necessarily what I call friendly thoughts, yet I stay in an openness because I haven't really gone to grab them. The reason I say this is just to perhaps, can we create a clear distinction here? Because, I talk to a lot of people lately. I'm talking to about 3-4 people a day. And there seems to be so much confusion about our thoughts and our feelings, and and how we adopt these things as somehow negative things. And I know that's not what you're saying. I'm just kind of like digging a bit to see if we can get a really good distinction here.
Yeah, as I say always, everything arises here, right? Yeah. So the arising of it is not the cause of suffering, right? The believing of it, or the identifying with it, or the, believing of the separation that seemingly is presented by the mind, when we just believe what arises, that's what causes suffering, right? It's not the arising of it. The arising of it, it just is, right? It always just is.
Sometimes, there's just there is no awareness of a thought too, like then there was no question, there was no thought, I was just seeing you, and
sure.
I remember the first time I saw you, it was a few years ago, I think, and I really, really loved how you share about kindness and tenderness, and I feel this is something that many of us could certainly use a lot more in our life, towards ourselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And yeah. Particularly when the contracting thoughts arise, shall we say, that to feel.
Well, tenderness is really part of our natural state, right? That's what is naturally here when openness is here, when presence is here, right? And over time, because of our past experience, tenderness got substituted by conditioning, right? So, there's a certain level of harshness in holding, right? And sometimes also, in the spiritual practice, people can have a misunderstanding that, spiritual practice means tough, means holding, means, forcing yourself, right? And so, I always make this distinction that either tenderness is here or past is here, right? If tenderness is not here, then means past is present, right? And we can all really use that, kindness of being present to what is, that's to really be present to what is, to really be available for what arises. We need to be really kind, right? There needs to be a real tenderness, because otherwise there's judgment, and there's criticism, and there's, avoidance, and there's, harshness, and there's not wanting to be here. And we need to, I often say, just let's take a moment in this kind, generous, loving way, can we just be here with what is in this kind, loving way, right? Because that's what our natural state is. We have just oftentimes we have forgotten about that. So.
And so what is spiritual practice then? When we refer, is that what you refer to as spiritual practice? The awareness of, am I being tender right now? Is it tenderness here now, or is it past here now, in the sense of a unfriendly thought?
Well, when I say spiritual practice, I mean really recognizing where you are at, right? That's really, are you at rest or are you suffering? Right? Because if you are suffering, then there is something you can do about it, right? But if you are at rest, there's nothing you have to do about it. So that's great.
So that's a very simple practice, right?
It's a very simple practice. But then we get, that's really simple. But then we get into like, if you are suffering or when you are suffering, then there's many different ways you can be with what is here to help yourself to be present. Right? And that's really, when I teach my programs, that's really a lot. What I teach these days is just information so that people know there's many different ways they can help themselves to be with what is, right? Because that's ultimately what we want, is just to be here, So how can we do that, right? We need to have all these skills. At least we need to know some things, So that's where it gets just a little more complicated. But the bottom line is, well, am I at rest or am I suffering, right?
The complication really is our self-talk about it, is the dialogue, I guess, we have in our head. We have a self-critic, many of us, and so often we don't really trust ourselves, and we're still looking to the outside for the answer, and we look to a teacher, we look to a friend, or we look to someone, because still somehow we're not believing that we already know ourselves, and nor have the comfortability to truly be ourselves and let ourselves be seen just as we are, warts and all.
The complication is because the complication arises depending on how much we are invested in the past, you see, and how long has it been here, right? And what is needed for it to really come back to rest. And here is where I think, Reenah, sometimes we need help of somebody else, you see. I really believe that sometimes we really need that because we just don't have that skill, and we want to learn that, we want to know it so that we can do it ourselves, right? Because it really depends. Whatever is needed, I say, whatever is needed, it doesn't matter, right?
Indeed, Neelam, and I hear you, and I certainly believe in the power of engagement, shall we say, the reflection. I spoke that with not so much meaning. It just felt like it wanted to be spoken, and for some of us, for some people, just to sort of be aware of that. You certainly reflected so much beauty to me, particularly a few years ago. The tenderness is just it's just beautiful, and perhaps when we are sitting with ourselves, we can really look inside and begin to trust our own voice too.
Sure, that's the reason, of course. That's why we are doing it.
So without this reflection, without this reflection with you now, you know, I wouldn't be having this inquiry too, right?
Right. And you know, the reason again we seek out, you know, help is because we don't know, right? So the more we, you know, get to know within, the less we need from the outside, right? But of course we seek it out, and that's for good reason. Because somewhere we don't trust it yet, you know, but eventually, of course, it's about you being able to just be here, right? Just the way you are, sure.
Mm. Mm. And so are you still teaching? Do you do satsangs in Santa Fe? And
You know, all I do these days is just teleconference calls. So I just do programs over the phone, over the teleconference calls. Yeah, different kinds of programs, shorter or longer, but mostly I work in longer programs right now. I really find it's, you know, it's really great to have a group of people together for a longer time and really be able to work with them more personally, more individually, more as a group also, you know, and really help them address all these questions of how to, you know, how to do it, because, you know, so many people know already presence, right? That's not really so much an issue, you know, anymore. But so many people don't know how to deal with what arises when it happens, right? So a lot of the work in the programs is about how to, and how to really look, you know, because you know how that is, that awakening is, you know, here, or awareness of presence is here, but then there is life. And then there's all these different issues that arise, and how to really bring that back to all the different areas of our life.
yes, I guess many people have the question how to live it in their job, and how to balance their families, and just how to live at each moment. How to meet
You know,
really, yeah.
You know, life is busy for everybody, right? And if we could let it, it would be extremely busy, right? Because there's constant, you know, demand from the outside, right? So, and this is just the way life, this is just the way things are. You know, if you have family, that's even more like that, right? Even more like that. And so what I always look at, you know, in my own life and for anybody else, is I'm looking at, you know, what is the priority really, right? What is really the most important thing? What is it that we value the most, right? And can we begin with that, and then can we plan everything else on top of that, you see? Because if presence and being here and stillness really is the priority, right? So how can I begin with that, right? Rather than try to find space for it in my busy life, you know? How can I make that choice and say, okay, this is the most important, so I'm going to start with that. That's what my day starts with. That's what my intention is first, right? And then then everything else can come on top of that, right? Because you know, can I sit for a moment? Can I sit for 5 minutes? Can I sit for however long I can, right? But can I give the priority to that first, right? And then can I do everything else? Because usually we do it the other way, you know, we do everything and then we say, where can I fit a little time so that I can be quiet, right? Well, I would say the other way, you know, quiet is where it's at, right? It takes a lot of discipline to really look at everything that comes into your life and say, is that really something that I want to engage with, right? Is that really something that matters? Is that really something that I want to give my energy to, right? So, and if you look at it like that, then really you're always coming back to your priority, right? You're always coming back to that, rather than always feeling like you have to fit your priority into a busy life, right? And you know, people say, well, if you have children and if you have a lot of things to do, you can't do it. And that's not really true, because I'm not asking for a whole day, I'm asking for a minute, right? But start with that minute, you know? Begin with that, right?
Yes, I find it's really important to pause, particularly if there is some sort of intense sensation arising. You know, I find it more comfortable simply to pause and to have pauses, and not to make a pause my goal, shall we say, but it sort of unfolds, and in the pause or in this gap is where the thing happens, you know, because my signpost is the contraction first.
Right.
And then when that is there, you know, I pause, and it's there that I see what's true and what's not true, and often, like you say, it's just a memory from the past that I believe is here now, but really it's just a sensation moving through the body, and what really is here now is not always what it appears, but it's always seen for me in the pause, or the gap, if you like, you know, just sort of have a gap. And you know, I find I can do this even in busyness, you know, even in the middle of talking to someone. If someone says something and I'm triggered, you know, I'm really able to, in busyness, or even standing in front of people, I can really go to this, pause into this gap. And I give myself more patience now, I guess, you know, because I would be impatient with myself and felt like I had to know straight away. But, you know, a bit of patience with ourselves goes a long way too. Hey, Neelam.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Mm.
Suns were lit by just one yes.
Is there something that arises with you that you would like to share, or?
Pave the path for more.
No, not really.
I'm
just enjoying.
I think I've got like all those sort of questions out for now. And,
good. That's good.
Yeah, I feel you receiving me, and you know, I really thank you for that.
Sure, for sure. Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this.
Much love to you, Neelam, and
Reenah, you enjoy yourself, okay?
yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. Take care. Take
Bye.
Every prayer flag in the wind flies for you.